My name is Evelyn Shore. I'm 38 years old, and I never imagined I'd be the only one turned away from my father's retirement party. I gave my name to the staff. They looked at the list, then at me. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on here." I turned to my brother Dorian, standing a few feet away in his designer suit. He didn't say a word. Then my father stepped forward. His voice was cold. "This is a private event, Evelyn. Let's not make a scene." I nodded, no tears, just silence. "Then let's keep the scene quiet," I said, and I walked away. "Before I tell you the rest, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and follow if you've ever had to walk away from the people who should have protected you, and didn't." I didn't cry as I walked away from the ballroom. Not then. The air outside was cooler than I expected for spring. I stood there a moment staring at the tinted windows of the hotel where my father's party echoed behind thick glass. Laughter, clinking glasses, a toast I wasn't part of. You'd think you'd notice when you stop being part of your own family, but it's never one big moment. It's dozens of small ones that don't seem like much until they pile up and crush you all at once. I grew up in a coastal town in Maine. My father, Franklin Shore, built Shore Mechanics from a one-bay repair shop into one of the most respected auto parts distributors in the region. He loved two things: appearances and control. My mother, Marianne, used to say he could polish a wrench with one hand and bury a secret with the other. I was the firstborn, the quiet one, always the one who stepped up, always the one who didn't need praise to keep showing up. Dorian, my younger brother, he was the golden child. Loud, charming, messy, in all the ways that somehow made people want to clean up after him. It wasn't that I wasn't loved. I was just useful. My days started early. While the rest of the Shore family hit snooze, I was on the warehouse floor reviewing delivery logs. I streamlined supplier contracts, cleaned up our balance sheets, held down departments Dorian couldn't name, let alone run. I didn't ask for recognition. I figured it would come eventually, like interest on a savings account. Just wait long enough. I still remember the day Dad called me into his office. A warm morning, an April sun pouring through the glass like it was trying to offer me something the room couldn't. "I need your signature, Ev," he said, sliding a document across the desk. His tone was friendly, his eyes focused. "Just a formality. We're expanding the Southern Line Bank, needs 2 signatures. You're on all the paperwork already." I looked at the number. $2.5 million, my name beside his. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked. And I did. Or maybe I just wanted to believe I wasn't just the Shore who made things run, but the one who belonged. I signed. He smiled. Not warmly, but with relief, the kind people give when they've successfully sealed a deal. That was a year ago. Since then, little things started shifting. My company email suddenly required higher access. I was locked out of the finance dashboard. My corporate card expired and was in review for weeks. Meetings were scheduled last minute. Or worse, not at all. Dorian was always present, though, smiling, grinning like the seat he was warming had been waiting for him all along. I once asked my father why I wasn't copied on the investor deck for Q3. He didn't even look up. Dorian's handling that now. "Don't worry yourself. You're better behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. Like a curtain. People don't notice when the curtain disappears, but they definitely miss the show." So when I stood outside that ballroom, not on the guest list of the man whose empire I'd helped hold together, it wasn't shocking. Not really. It was just confirmation. But I wasn't going to beg to be let back in. I'd already done that once with my time, my silence, and my loyalty. And I was done paying for the privilege of being ignored. I started keeping track the day my calendar stopped syncing with the boardroom meetings. It wasn't paranoia. At first I thought it was just a glitch in the system. I emailed IT. They said nothing was wrong. Still, 3 weeks in a row I showed up to meetings that had been moved or canceled, only no one told me. I stopped asking. Instead, I started paying attention. The finance reports I used to review every Friday, password protected. You no longer have access to this folder. My corporate credit card deactivated. No explanation. When I asked Dorian, he laughed. Probably just an oversight. You know how finance is. Or maybe they're trimming down expenses. You don't really need that card, do you? No. I didn't need it. I only used it to buy software licenses and keep the HR system from crashing. Then came the supplier calls. Ms. Shore, we sent the invoice 3 weeks ago. We haven't heard back. Are you still the contact person? I wasn't. Not anymore. My name had been quietly removed from the vendor lists. The pieces started to arrange themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. I wasn't just being left out, I was being erased. And the irony, my signature was still on that loan. The $2.5 million liability sat under both our names like a co-signed anchor. I remember sitting in the break room one afternoon drinking cold coffee from a paper cup. My hands shook, not with fear, but with something heavier. That dull, thudding kind of ache that comes when you realize you've been protecting people who were never protecting you. Franklin had always said, family is everything, and I believed him. But maybe I had confused obligation with love. One night I stayed late. The office was dark except for the soft glow of my laptop. I pulled up the internal file system, checking shared folders, looking through archived emails. One folder stood out. Executive Travel, Q2. I clicked. Flight receipts, hotel invoices, Dorian's name on all of them. Miami, Chicago, Vegas, and the amounts excessive. 5-star accommodations, bottle service, steakhouse tabs that looked like small mortgages. I felt my jaw tighten. Not because of the spending, though that was its own problem, but because I knew none of it had been approved through protocol. He was using the company like a personal credit line, and no one was stopping him, because no one wanted to, because I wasn't supposed to notice. But I did. And the moment I noticed something in me shifted. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I felt quiet. The kind of quiet that happens before a storm. The kind that isn't passive. It's patient, focused. That's when I reached out to Marcus Delaney. He was a friend from college, now a corporate attorney. We hadn't spoken in years, but his response came fast. Meet me. Don't talk about this over email. We met in a quiet cafe on the north side of town. Rain tapped against the windows like it was listening in. I told him everything. The signatures, the missing access, the expenses, the silence. He listened, nodding, then leaned forward and said, Evelyn, if what you're saying is true, you're holding a ticking time bomb. And legally, if your name's still on that loan, you're the one standing closest when it goes off. I stared at him, the truth settling like lead in my chest. I wasn't just being pushed out, I was being set up, and I wasn't going to wait around for the fallout. After that meeting with Marcus, I didn't sleep much, not because I was afraid. I'd lived with quiet fear for years. It wasn't new. What kept me awake was the clarity. For the first time, I saw my family for what they were. Not a fortress, not a legacy, not a blood-bound circle of trust, just people. Flawed, self-serving, and willing to let me take the fall if it meant saving themselves. I started documenting everything. Every invoice Dorian approved without oversight, every email I was left off, every system lockout, every conversation where I was told to trust the process. I printed them, stored them offline, labeled them with dates and details. Franklin once said, details are what make or break a deal. I wondered how he'd feel knowing I'd learned that lesson from him. I wasn't ready to go public. Not yet. But I was building my parachute. Meanwhile, the charade at Shore Mechanics continued. Dorian strutted through the halls like a man auditioning to be CEO of a company he didn't understand. He threw around buzzwords he couldn't define. Efficiency, disruption, vertical integration. He ordered a redesign of our company logo that cost $40,000 and looked like it was made on a free app. Franklin called it vision. I called it vanity. One morning, I walked into my office, if you could still call it that, and found that my desk had been moved. Not removed, just relocated. Into a smaller glass cubicle near the stairwell. No nameplate, no privacy. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look. I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat down, powered up my laptop, and continued cataloging. There's something strange that happens when you stop needing to be loved, when you stop begging for belonging. You get dangerous, not in the loud throw-a-chair-across-the-room way. No, my kind of dangerous was colder, strategic, like chess played in candlelight. Marcus followed up with a plan. If they've started excluding you from corporate decisions while still using your name legally, you have grounds to challenge everything. But you need more proof, especially that they're still representing you to third parties. That's when I remembered the bank. The loan had been processed through Midcoast First. I hadn't received any statements in months. When I'd asked Franklin about it last quarter, he'd waved it off. "It's under control. You don't need to worry." He was right. I didn't need to worry. I needed to confirm. I drove down to the bank on a rainy Thursday morning. I wore black slacks, a blazer, no makeup. Neutral, professional, invisible. The branch manager was polite but cautious. "Yes, Ms. Shore, your name is still listed as joint guarantor. I'm afraid there have been 3 missed payments, but they were recently brought current. A family representative came in last week." My voice didn't shake. I just nodded. "May I ask who that was?" He checked. "Dorian Shore." I smiled. "Of course. So they were using my name. Still. To buy time, to buy credit, to buy trust. And all the while they were cutting me out from the inside. This wasn't neglect. This was strategy. They weren't just planning for me to disappear. They were planning for me to take the hit when the numbers stopped adding up. But I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to document everything. And when the time came, I wouldn't yell. I'd just let the truth speak for itself. After leaving the bank, I sat in my car for 10 minutes without starting the engine. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm, brushing away the rain, like it was trying to keep the world from getting too close. I watched people walk by with umbrellas and grocery bags caught in their own lives, their own errands. None of them knew I was sitting there realizing my family had officially weaponized my silence. I'd given them the benefit of the doubt. Again and again, excused the patterns, explained away the signs, told myself it wasn't personal, that family gets messy. That loyalty sometimes looks like sacrifice. But loyalty without respect isn't love, it's servitude. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened a blank document and started writing a resignation letter. Not for my job, I didn't need to resign. They had already done that for me slowly and silently. But from the role I'd been cast in for nearly 4 decades, the fixer, the good daughter, the safe bet. I was done, but quitting quietly wasn't enough. I had to protect myself. So I booked a meeting with our company's HR director, Jennifer Chen. She was smart, efficient, and most importantly, she didn't owe the Shore family anything. When I walked into her office, she looked surprised to see me. "Evelyn, everything okay?" I sat down across from her, folding my hands in my lap. Calm, controlled. "I'd like to review my current standing in the company," I said. "My access has been restricted. My role has been restructured without documentation. And I'm still legally tied to corporate obligations that I have no current authority over." She blinked. "That's a lot. Do you have documentation?" I handed her a folder. Meeting removals, access denials, expense discrepancies, screenshots, emails, dates, details. To her credit, she didn't flinch. "This is serious," she said. I nodded. "I know." She promised to escalate it to the board. Not Franklin, not Dorian, the board. But I didn't wait. I had a different audience in mind. That evening, I created a Dropbox folder labeled Contingency. Inside, I uploaded everything: copies of the loan documents, the financial reports I'd salvaged, the emails, photos of the travel receipts, a timeline. Then I drafted 2 emails. The first was to Midcoast First Bank's Risk Division. It wasn't an accusation, just a list of discrepancies and concerns written in professional language signed under my full name with joint guarantor beneath it. The second was anonymous. To the Maine State Office of Corporate Oversight, subject line Potential Fraudulent Activity, Shore Mechanics. I didn't click send, not yet, but my finger hovered over the mouse. It's a strange thing watching your own story shift in real time. I wasn't acting out of anger. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted clarity, truth, and to stop being complicit in my own erasure. I closed the laptop, sat back. The sky outside was dark now, the rain slowing. It felt like the moment before an orchestra begins. The conductor raises the baton. Everyone holds their breath. Silence, not because nothing is happening, but because something is about to. I wasn't going to announce anything. I was just going to move, quietly, deliberately, and let the silence speak louder than they ever expected. By the time I returned to the office the next day, something had shifted. Jennifer Chen hadn't said anything directly, but I saw it in the way she looked at me as I passed her desk. There was a pause just half a second too long, her eyes scanning my face like she was searching for something she hadn't seen before. Maybe she was. Maybe I looked different. Or maybe I had simply stopped trying to disappear. At noon, I received a calendar invite. No sender, no subject. Just a meeting titled Internal Alignment with 3 attendees, me, Jennifer, and Franklin Shore. I stared at it for a long time. Franklin rarely aligned with anyone. If he wanted something, he ordered it. If he didn't, it didn't happen. Meetings were for appearances, not discussions. I accepted. The meeting room was one of those over-designed corporate spaces, glass walls, filtered air silence so thick it made every sip of water sound like thunder. Franklin was already seated when I arrived. Dorian wasn't there, and that alone told me everything I needed to know. He looked up at me like I was a misplaced document. "Evelyn," he said, "let's speak frankly." I smiled. "We always do, don't we?" He didn't laugh. Jennifer sat between us. Neutral. Her legal pad was blank, but her posture was tense. "I understand you've raised concerns about your role in the company," he said. "Let me be clear. We're simply evolving, reorganizing, making space for new leadership. This isn't personal." I tilted my head. "Interesting. Most ambushes usually aren't." He frowned. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my folder. "You might want to review this." He took it. It was a copy of the amended vendor contract Dorian had signed last quarter, without board approval, without procurement clearance, and using my former login credentials. For a moment, Franklin didn't speak. His jaw moved slightly, like he was chewing his own pride. "You've been digging," he said. "I've been surviving," I replied. He turned to Jennifer. "This is internal housekeeping. I'll handle it." She didn't move. "I've already forwarded the concern to the board," she said. "And to compliance. It's protocol." The silence that followed was surgical. Franklin stared at her, then at me, then leaned back. "You think this will end well for you?" he asked, voice low. "No," I said. "I think it will end honestly." He stood and walked out without another word. Jennifer looked at me. "You should be careful." I nodded. "I've been careful for 38 years. That's the problem." Back at my desk, my tiny glass-walled desk, I opened the anonymous email draft and added one more attachment, the altered contract Dorian had forged under my access. Then I hit send. Not to punish them, to protect myself. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But for the first time in years, I felt still, like I had finally stopped rowing in circles. I was no longer waiting for someone to rescue me. I was building the shore I wanted to stand on. And whatever storm they thought they were preparing for, they forgot one thing. The weather was already changing. The first sign that something had landed came 2 days later. An internal memo was sent to all senior managers. Subject line: temporary review of financial protocols. Immediate freeze on new contracts. The message was vague, but the undercurrent was clear. Something had gone wrong. Someone had noticed. Jennifer didn't mention my name, and I didn't expect her to. But I saw the shift in posture when I walked into the break room. The glances, the low murmurs. People who had forgotten I was still part of the furniture were suddenly remembering I was built into the foundation. I didn't gloat. That's not who I am. But I watched. And I listened. Dorian's smile became tighter. He stopped whistling in the hallway. His tailored suits looked the same, but his energy was different, twitchier, defensive, like someone who had just realized the ground he was walking on might be paper thin. He cornered me by the elevator later that afternoon. "You went to HR," he said flatly. "You escalated this." I pressed the elevator button. "You did this to yourself," I said. "I just gave it a name." His eyes flashed, not with anger, but fear disguised as arrogance. "You think the board will side with you? You've never been more than a background player." I smiled gently. "Funny, background players don't usually hold the original contracts." He didn't reply. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As they closed between us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: equal footing. That evening, I went home and watered the plants on my windowsill. Lavender rosemary, a stubborn basil that refused to grow straight, small quiet things. Like me. Until you got too close and realized their roots were stronger than they looked. I made tea, sat down with my laptop, checked the Dropbox folder. There was a new notification. Accessed March 11th, 7:42 p.m. IP address, Midcoast First Bank. They were looking, they were reading, and they weren't ignoring me anymore. My phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Things are getting out of hand." No name, but I knew the cadence, the clipped language. It was my father. I didn't reply. Instead, I went back to the document I had started the night after meeting Marcus. I had titled it Exit Strategy. It wasn't a revenge plan. I wasn't going to torch the company. I wasn't going to humiliate anyone. That would have been easy, tempting, but small. What I wanted was cleaner, clearer, a full detachment from the company, from the debt, from the cycle. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to leave whole. I sat there for another hour refining language, collecting my facts, outlining the terms under which I'd formally relinquish my role. No fanfare, just precision, because when someone spends enough time trying to erase you, the most radical thing you can do is walk away on your own terms. The kind of freedom that doesn't ask for permission, just clarity, and maybe finally peace. The message came on a Sunday morning. I was making coffee, the light in my kitchen soft and golden, the smell of cardamom filling the air. It was one of those rare, quiet mornings where everything felt still, where for a moment I could almost believe peace was permanent. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text. Short, cold, familiar. "Please do not attend the family gathering next week. Your presence would be disruptive. We hope you understand." No signature, but I didn't need one. The wording was classic Franklin Shore, formal, emotionally sterile, laced with that condescending civility he'd mastered like a second language. A second text followed. This one was from my mother. "Evelyn, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Let things settle. Maybe next time." I stood there holding my mug, not moving, not blinking. Next time. As if this was a canceled lunch. As if exile could be rescheduled. For a few minutes, I just stood in silence. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. Instead, I reread the message. Once, twice, a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel it completely. This was it. Not just the erasure from a company or a credit line or a set of meetings. This was the final cut. I had been officially uninvited from my own family. A family I had carried, protected, covered, forgiven. And now, I was a liability. I set the mug down and opened my laptop. There were no new emails from HR, no updates from Jennifer, but something inside me had already clicked into place. They weren't pulling back because they felt threatened. They were pulling back because they had never intended to include me from the start. I was only as useful as I was quiet, only as welcome as I was compliant. I opened the Dropbox folder, reviewed every file again, the invoices, the communications, the legal documents, the timeline. Then I clicked over to the bank letter I had drafted 2 nights before. Subject request for formal removal from co-guarantor liability. File number 2582A. It was time. I hit send. There was no immediate relief, no weight lifted. But there was clarity, cold and sharp. I didn't belong to them anymore. I had wanted closure, some final moment of reckoning, maybe even an apology. But sometimes the apology never comes. Sometimes the door doesn't slam shut, it just stops opening. I spent the rest of the day in quiet motion. I cleaned the apartment, did laundry, deleted the shared calendar I had with my mother, blocked Dorian's number. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because I didn't want reminders of the person I used to be. That version of me, the one who kept hoping for recognition, who kept waiting for love to look like fairness, she was gone. And in her place was someone who no longer needed the table, because she was building her own. Late that night, I stepped out onto my balcony. The city below was humming, unaware. I looked up at the sky and thought about my father's voice, that measured tone he always used when he wanted to seem reasonable. Let's not make a scene, Evelyn. They had built their lives on avoiding scenes, keeping things tidy, polished, controlled. But I wasn't part of their script anymore, and I wasn't going to whisper to make them comfortable. I didn't need a spotlight. I just needed a clear path forward, even if I had to walk it alone. Monday morning came with a strange calm, the kind of stillness you feel just before a storm changes direction. I woke early, showered, dressed in gray slacks and a navy blouse, clean lines, simple, deliberate. I didn't want to look confrontational. I just wanted to look clear. At 8:03 a.m., I walked into Midcoast First Bank's downtown branch. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon and cold air. I waited no more than 5 minutes before being escorted into a private office by a young man named Kyle. He wore a suit too big for him and had a nervous energy that reminded me of Dorian's interns, but his hands stopped fidgeting the moment I placed the folder on the desk. "This outlines the documentation you'll need to remove my name from the Shore Mechanics line of credit," I said evenly. "I've included evidence that I no longer hold any operational authority despite being listed as a guarantor." He flipped through it. His expression shifted with every page. This is extensive." "Yes, I said it is." He excused himself to speak with his supervisor. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look out the window. I just sat still, letting the weight of the moment settle into my bones. It wasn't revenge I felt, it was release. 15 minutes later, he returned. A senior banker followed him, an older sharper, with the kind of voice that only came from decades of dealing with power and the people who abused it. "Ms. Shore," she said, "thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll need to conduct an internal review, but based on what I've seen so far, I believe we can begin the detachment process." "Good," I said. "Please notify me in writing." "Of course." She paused. "You do understand this could create consequences for Shore Mechanics." I met her eyes. They made their choices. I'm making mine. I left the bank with nothing in my hands, no grand statement, no dramatic send-off. But something inside me had shifted position. The weight had moved. That afternoon, I took it one step further. I sent the full financial report redacted, structured with supporting evidence to the Maine State Office of Corporate Oversight. I used a secure upload portal, listed my name, signed it as a former executive officer. No anonymous cloak this time. No hiding. I wanted my voice to be attached to the truth. I had nothing to fear anymore. An hour later, I received an auto-reply confirming receipt. 10 minutes after that, my phone rang. Blocked number. I didn't answer. A voicemail came through. I let it play over speaker while standing by my kitchen window. It was my father. "Evelyn, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're putting everything we've built at risk. You want to walk away, fine, but don't drag the rest of us down with you. Family means protecting each other, even when we don't agree." He paused, then said more quietly, "Call me back. We can fix this." I deleted the message. They had their definition of family, and I had mine. Mine was built on truth, on accountability, on not asking anyone to burn themselves just to keep the image alive. By nightfall, I received an alert my Dropbox folder had been accessed again. This time, multiple files. Someone was searching. I sat in the dim glow of my apartment, a cup of mint tea cooling beside me. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't doubting. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval or their apology. I was finished. Not bitter, not broken, just done. And if they thought I would come crawling back when things got hard, they had misunderstood who I had become. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the consequence. By Tuesday morning, the calls started. First came the unknown numbers. Then came the familiar ones. I let them all go to voicemail. The first voice was my mother's. "Evelyn, sweetheart, please don't do anything rash. You've always been the reasonable one. We can talk this through, can't we?" Then came Dorian. "What the hell did you send to the state? Are you trying to ruin this family?" You think you'll come out of this looking clean? You're out of your depth. Ev. I saved each message in a folder titled Post-Truth. Around noon, Jennifer Chen knocked on the glass wall of my tiny relocated office. Can we talk? I nodded. She sat across from me, closing the door behind her. Her voice was low. We've received notice of a pending inquiry from state oversight. They won't confirm who filed it, but, well, there's no mystery. I said nothing. She looked at me for a long time, then finally asked, "Why didn't you just leave quietly?" I met her eyes. Because quiet is how I ended up invisible in the first place. She nodded slowly, then added almost to herself, "I wish I had your clarity." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to say. After she left, I opened my laptop and scanned the latest board communications. There was tension in the language now. The kind of coded language people use when they're trying to act calm while the walls shift around them. We recommend a temporary freeze on discretionary spending. Please review current leadership structure to ensure operational compliance. Ensure all legal documents reflect accurate signatory status. It was happening, not quickly, but undeniably. And I was no longer on the outside looking in. I had become the axis they were now spinning around. By late afternoon, the calls changed tone. Franklin messaged me again. "Let's be civil. Don't let emotion ruin years of progress. We can find a way forward if you just step back from this." Think of the family name. The family name, as if it hadn't already been stained long before I pressed send, as if silence could scrub history clean. I replied to none of them. Instead, I took a walk. Just around the block, coat pulled tight against the breeze scarf wrapped at the throat. The cold helped me breathe. People passed by with shopping bags, strollers, laughter. No one knew who I was. No one asked why my hands were shaking slightly or why I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead. That was the gift and the curse of walking away. Freedom didn't come with applause. It came with space, and I was learning to fill that space with myself. When I got home, I found a delivery at my door. No return label, just a plain brown box with my name written in black ink. I carried it to the kitchen table, opened it carefully. Inside were framed family photos, one from my college graduation, one from a long-ago beach trip, and one from my 30th birthday where I stood slightly off-center while everyone else clinked champagne flutes. No note, no message, just the pictures. A quiet gesture meant to wound gently, a final reminder of the version of me they preferred. Smiling, supportive, slightly out of frame. I put the frames face down, then I turned off my phone. And for the first time that day, I let the silence settle, not because I was being pushed aside, but because I was choosing it. On my terms, in my time. And I didn't flinch. It was Dorian who called to arrange the meeting. He didn't sound angry this time. He sounded tired. Like a man who had been told the game was over but still hoped the referee might change their mind. Just one conversation, he said. "Dad wants to talk. You should hear him out." "We're still family." I agreed. Not because I needed to hear him out, but because I needed to say goodbye in person, not with rage, not with regret, but with finality. We met at a restaurant my family had loved for years, the kind with white linen tablecloths, low lighting, and a reputation that ran deeper than the food. They were already there when I arrived. My father Dorian and my mother sitting at a round corner table like they were hosting a peace summit. No one stood up to greet me. I didn't expect them to. I sat down. Silence hung between us like smoke. My father broke it first. "You've made your point," he said, voice tight. "We've had to answer questions we never should have been asked. And your actions have complicated matters." I folded my hands on the table. "What actions are you referring to?" "Sending evidence to the bank that proves I had no operational control, reporting financial irregularities that used my name illegally, clarifying my position to regulatory bodies." Dorian shifted in his seat. "Ev, come on. You didn't have to go nuclear." My eyes didn't leave my father's. "You set the fire. I just stopped pretending it wasn't burning." My mother spoke softly. Her voice was worn not with age, but with decades of looking away. "Why couldn't you just let it go, Evelyn?" "We were trying to protect the family." I turned to her steady. "No. You were trying to protect a version of the family that looked good on paper. The version where I stayed quiet, reliable, invisible. No one responded. So I continued. I'm officially off the loan. The bank confirmed it this morning. My exit is legally filed. My records have been transferred. I no longer represent Shore Mechanics in any capacity. My father stiffened. You've made yourself an enemy. No, I said. I've made myself free. He leaned forward slightly. You'll regret this. Maybe not now, but someday. When the dust settles and you're standing alone. I smiled. I'd rather stand alone in truth than sit with you in denial. The words hung there. Not shouted, not weaponized, just placed gently on the table like a final course no one had room for. I stood up. My mother reached out but didn't touch me. Evelyn, she said, almost a whisper. I looked at her for a long moment. I don't hate you, I said, but I'm done hurting myself trying to be loved by people who only know how to need me. Then I walked away, not out of spite, but because the conversation had ended years ago. I had just finally stopped replying in silence. Outside, the night air was crisp. I breathed it in deeply, feeling the cold settle into my lungs like truth. The restaurant faded behind me. So did their voices. So did everything I used to do just to feel like I belonged. I didn't look back. There was nothing back there that hadn't already let me go. It wasn't dramatic. Leaving them didn't come with thunder or applause. No one ran after me. No one yelled my name through the parking lot. No last-minute hug. No cracks in their armor. Just silence. And I was finally okay with that. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the floor like it might offer some sort of instruction on how to be someone new. My coat was still on. My bag hadn't moved from where I dropped it by the door. There were no lights on except the lamp near the window casting a soft golden haze across the floorboards. I wasn't crying. That surprised me. For a while I had imagined that once the confrontation happened, once I said the words I needed to say, I'd fall apart. That grief would flood in like it always had, sweeping me off the shore I'd worked so hard to build. But it didn't. What came instead was stillness, a kind of quiet I'd never known before, not the kind that follows rejection or disappointment. This was the kind of quiet that wraps itself around your spine and says you're safe now. It was unfamiliar, not joyful, not triumphant, just true. I got up, took off my coat, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled down a small wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photos, handwritten notes, a bracelet my mother gave me when I turned 16, a Father's Day card I'd written to Franklin, back when I still believed his love could be earned. I sat with those things, held them, studied them like a forensic investigator trying to understand a version of herself that no longer existed. Then, one by one, I let them go. I didn't burn them. I didn't tear them apart. I simply placed them back in the box, closed the lid, and returned it to the shelf. Not because I wanted to keep them close, but because I no longer needed to carry them. They were proof of who I had been, and they no longer held power over who I was becoming. The next morning, I woke early. The sun was rising through the blinds in wide, gentle streaks. I made tea, I answered emails, and I smiled softly, almost absently at the silence around me. There was no emergency to fix, no meeting I'd been left out of, no message to decode or damage to contain, just the sound of a kettle boiling, a page turning, my own breath steady and full. Later that day, I walked down to a small co-working space I'd rented a few blocks away. A modest setup exposed brick big windows, a coffee bar that served burnt espresso, but it was mine. I sat at a new desk with no family crest behind me, no nameplate handed down through lineage, and opened my laptop. I started drafting a new project proposal, one I'd been thinking about for years but never had the time or permission to pursue, a consulting firm, specifically for women founders navigating toxic investor structures and legacy-based power dynamics, because I knew what it was like to build something with your whole heart and be treated like a placeholder, and I knew what it took to walk away. At lunchtime, I looked around the room, young professionals typing fast, a woman laughing into a headset, someone scribbling diagrams onto a whiteboard like the future depended on it. and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was watching the world move past me. I was inside it. I was part of it. Not the anchor, not the shadow, not the backup plan. Just Evelyn, present, enough, free. 3 days after the restaurant, I got the first voicemail from Jennifer. Her voice, usually crisp and controlled, was fraying at the edges. Evelyn, I just wanted to give you a heads up. There's been a freeze issued on several of Shore Mechanics' accounts. The state inquiry has moved faster than expected. They're requesting access to internal files. The board is rattled. I played it twice, not out of disbelief, but because it sounded like something I never thought I'd hear someone else finally being forced to clean up the mess I didn't make. I didn't respond. That night, I poured a glass of red wine and stood at my window watching the lights of the city blink and shimmer like they'd been waiting for me to see them clearly. I was out, truly out, and yet the ripples of what I'd done were just beginning. The next morning, I checked the Dropbox folder I thought I'd never need again. There had been 5 new access attempts, 2 successful. One of them was from the bank. The other was from someone inside Shore Mechanics, the same IP address as Franklin's office. They were trying to assess the damage, trying to figure out how much I had known and how long I'd known it. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was no longer something I had to prove. It had a life of its own now. Mid-afternoon, I received an email, anonymous, no name, just the subject line, "Congratulations. You did what we all wanted to, but couldn't." Attached was a screenshot of the company Slack thread, internal, private. Someone had leaked it. Messages from mid-level managers panicking about the audit. One wrote, "She warned them." Over and over. Another. It was Evelyn who held the line for years. The moment she left, everything cracked. I sat back in my chair, the weight of that sentence landing harder than any accusation ever had. Because they saw me now, not as a liability, not as a background player, but as the pillar they'd ignored until it vanished. At 5:12 p.m., my mother called, for the 5th time that week. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, but I didn't listen to it. I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. I wasn't holding space for people who only came to find me when the house started burning. I hadn't lit the match. I'd simply stopped shielding them from the consequences. That night, a friend invited me to dinner. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to say yes to something that had nothing to do with obligation. But I went. We laughed, ate pasta too late, split a bottle of wine that wasn't very good but tasted like freedom. No one asked about my father. No one mentioned my last name. And for the first time, I introduced myself without adding a caveat, without explaining who I was connected to. Just Evelyn. It was enough. And somewhere back in that glass building, I used to orbit like a silent moon. The ground was shifting. And I wasn't the one who had to hold it together anymore. It started with a LinkedIn notification, one of those generic alerts. Someone from your past has a new position. I clicked it without thinking. Absent-minded, just a reflex. But the name hit me like cold water. Liam Prescott. The same Liam who used to date Dorian's best friend. The same Liam who sat across from me at so many family events offering polite smiles while subtly dismissing everything I said. The same Liam who once told my mother that I was intelligent but difficult to engage. Apparently, he'd just taken a job at a mid-sized venture capital firm in Portland, the same firm I had just signed as a consulting partner through my new venture. I stared at the screen, half amused, half unsurprised. The world is smaller than people think, especially when you spend years in the shadows watching everyone else take the spotlight, unaware that you were quietly building the stage beneath them. I didn't reach out, but the universe did something better. The next week, I was invited to present a short talk at the firm's internal summit. Topic: financial ethics in founder-led startups. Very on brand. I arrived early, calm in a dark blazer and simple heels. No designer labels, no family crest, just clean intention. As I stepped into the conference space, I saw him, Liam, standing near the coffee bar chatting with someone from operations. Our eyes met. Briefly. He blinked like he was seeing something he couldn't quite recognize, because he wasn't. He was seeing me. Not Evelyn the silent fixer, not Evelyn Dorian's background sibling, but Evelyn Shore, the keynote speaker. He approached during the break holding a cup of black coffee and a face full of awkward tension. "Evelyn," he said. "Wow, it's been a while." I smiled, neutral. "It has." He paused. "Didn't realize you'd transitioned into consulting." I nodded. "I've found clarity tends to follow when you step outside the noise." He laughed softly, unsure whether I was making a joke. "I'm working under Patricia now," he said. "She speaks very highly of your work." "That's kind of her," I replied. "She's been excellent to collaborate with." He shifted. "So, you're leading the initiative on ethical audits?" I met his gaze fully. "Yes, I am." He didn't say anything else for a long moment, then quietly, "It's good to see you doing well." It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a crack in the old mirror. Not enough to rebuild anything, but enough to remind me how far I'd come. Later during my presentation, I mentioned a case study, a former executive removed from decision-making while still being held responsible for financial risk. I didn't say names. I didn't have to. The room went still. Eyes met eyes. The message was received. Afterward, several attendees came up to thank me. A few asked about consulting opportunities. Liam didn't say another word, but he stayed for the entire talk. And when I stepped off the stage, the applause was real. Not because of my last name, not because someone vouched for me, but because I had earned it, alone, finally. 2 days after the summit, an industry blog published a short recap of my talk. It was polite, professional, and almost clinical. But one line stood out. Evelyn Shore, formerly of Shore Mechanics, delivered the most incisive, quietly powerful session of the conference. Quietly powerful. I read it 3 times. There was something strangely poetic about it, how they had unintentionally named the very thing I had spent most of my life being punished for. Quiet and powerful. That article spread faster than I expected. People started tagging me on LinkedIn. I got emails from founders, COOs, even journalists. A small profile followed the next week, calling me a case study in quiet resistance. I didn't respond to every message, but I saw every name, and I remembered which ones used to walk past me like I was part of the wallpaper. Then came the inevitable. A text from my cousin Marla. "Just saw your name in a write-up. Impressive. Didn't know you were doing all this." I stared at the screen for a long time. Marla had once introduced me at a wedding as Dorian's sister, who's into admin or something. I replied, "Thanks. I've always been doing it. Just not where anyone could steal the credit anymore." She didn't text back. Later that week, I received an invitation, a formal one, from the Greater New England Business Consortium. They were giving an award, Ethics in Leadership. Apparently, my name had come up more than once. I laughed when I read it. Not because I found it funny, but because it felt like the universe was whispering, "They see you now. They can't unsee you." I didn't accept immediately. I didn't need the award. But I did need to know that it wasn't being offered as some backhanded apology from the same ecosystem that once shut every door in my face. So I asked a question in reply. "Will Shore Mechanics be in attendance?" Their response was swift. "They are not on the list of invitees. This is about individual contribution, not legacy." I accepted. The night of the event was simple. A dinner, a speech, no red carpet. But the energy was sharp, respectful, and unmistakably different from anything I'd ever been part of before. People looked me in the eye when they spoke. They didn't introduce me through someone else. They didn't ask what Dorian was doing now. They asked about me, what I was building, where I was going next. After the ceremony, I stood near the back of the room sipping sparkling water and letting myself breathe. I wasn't waiting for my family to appear. I wasn't hoping they would. But I did notice when someone whispered, "She used to work at Shore Mechanics, right? Wonder why they let her go." A different voice replied, "They didn't. She let them go." I turned my head just slightly, didn't smile, didn't gloat, but I felt something settle in my chest like a lock clicking into place. This was what freedom looked like. Not loud, not flashy, just real, earned, and mine. It was my mother who reached out, not with demands, not with guilt, just a short message: "I'd like to talk. Only if you're willing." I waited a full day before answering. Then, tomorrow, 10 a.m., the bench near Pine and Whitmore. A quiet spot, neutral ground. When I arrived, she was already sitting there, hands folded in her lap scarf tucked carefully beneath her coat. She looked older, not in the way age marks skin, but in the way regret leaves its own shadows. I sat beside her, leaving space. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said, "I saw the article. And the photo. You looked whole." I nodded. "I am." She looked down at her gloves. "I should have protected you better. I should have seen it sooner." I didn't rush to forgive. I didn't jump to rescue her from the discomfort. Instead, I said, "You saw what you were willing to see, and you acted the best you knew how, but I can't carry the weight of what you didn't do." She inhaled shakily. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss the idea of you," I said gently. But the real version, the one who stood quietly while I disappeared, that's someone I had to let go. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. "I'm proud of you," she said, "even if I never said it before." That landed somewhere deep inside me, not as healing, not as closure, but as truth, late but still honest. I stood first. "I don't hate you," I told her, "but I'm not coming back. This piece, what I've built, it cost too much to gamble." She nodded, eyes full. "I understand." And just like that, we said goodbye. No embrace, no promises, just two women sitting on a bench between what was and what would never be again. And as I walked away, the wind carried only one sound. Silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was earned. The day I moved into my new apartment, it rained. Not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle like the city was washing something away. The building was nothing fancy. No doorman, no designer tile in the lobby, but it had wide windows and real wood floors and a tiny balcony that faced the sunrise. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, cardboard boxes around me, coffee mug in hand, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Not because I was nervous, because I wasn't. This was the first space in over a decade that didn't have their fingerprints on it. No furniture they picked, no photos they approved, no obligations tied to whose name was on the lease. It was mine, entirely mine. Later that week, I finished setting up the small home office in the corner. Just a desk, a laptop, a corkboard, and 3 potted plants I hadn't yet named. That same afternoon, I took my first client call from the new space. A woman named Aria, founder of a small eco-startup in Vermont, wanted help preparing her company's first investor audit. She was brilliant, nervous, eager to do it right. Halfway through the call, she paused and said, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your voice is really grounding. You don't sound rushed. You make me feel like I'm not crazy for caring this much." I smiled. "That's not crazy," I said. "That's called integrity." She laughed, a little teary. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked around. No applause, no one watching. Just the quiet, steady heartbeat of something new taking shape. A few days later, I received a handwritten thank you note from a founder I'd helped months ago. Inside was a small pin. A silver triangle, nothing flashy, just a symbol. Underneath it, she'd written, "For standing firm when others bend." I pinned it to my corkboard, not as a trophy, as a reminder. That this version of my life, the one with firm boundaries and chosen purpose, wasn't a side path. It was the main road. I walked to the farmer's market the next morning, bought tulips, chatted with a vendor about lemon thyme. No one knew my last name, no one cared who my father was. They just smiled. And for the first time, I didn't shrink from being seen. I simply said thanks and meant it. The invitation came in an email with a simple subject line, "Would you consider speaking to our cohort?" It was from a nonprofit that mentored young women launching their first businesses. They had seen my talk from the ethics summit passed around like a whisper that somehow stuck. I said yes before I had time to overthink it. The event was held in a small community center with folding chairs and half-eaten bagels in the corner. No cameras. No press, just 30 pairs of eyes that reminded me of a younger version of myself, sharp, searching, hopeful, and a little bit tired. When it was time for me to speak, I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need to. I started with this. I used to think being overlooked was a weakness, that if people didn't see me, it meant I had failed to be visible. But I learned something along the way: people will ignore what threatens them, especially when that threat comes quietly. And power, real power, doesn't beg to be noticed. It builds one silent boundary at a time. The room was quiet, not disengaged, but leaning in. I talked about the mistakes I made, the times I stayed too long, the years I believed loyalty meant sacrificing yourself for people who'd never lift you out when the water rose. I told them about the day I walked away, the silence that followed, and how that silence wasn't empty, it was mine. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. What was the hardest part, she asked. I thought for a moment. Forgiving myself for mistaking survival for love, I said. She nodded, eyes glistening. When it was over, several came up to talk. They didn't want selfies or signatures. They just wanted to say thank you for saying it out loud. One of them slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand before leaving. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened it. It read, "You made me feel less alone in a room full of people. That's rare. Thank you." I held the paper in my hand a long time before placing it on my corkboard right next to the silver triangle. 2 pieces of proof. That being heard didn't require volume, just truth, and the willingness to stop whispering when it's your own life at stake. The sun was setting outside my window. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft gold slowly fading into a cooler blue, the kind of light that touches everything without asking permission. I was sitting in my chair by the window, a book in my lap. I wasn't really reading, and a mug of tea warming my hands. The same mug I bought the week I moved in. It had no logo, no slogan, no memory tied to someone else, just ceramic and comfort. Across from me was my corkboard, the triangle pin, the note from the young woman, a small photo of the farmer's market flower stall where the vendor always remembered my name. Quiet reminders, no trophies, no press clippings, just things that meant something because I chose them. There had been no contact from my father, not after the audit became public, not after their firm was removed from the state contract list, not even after articles began circulating about corporate misrepresentation and unethical leverage of personal guarantors. I wasn't waiting for a call anymore. I had stopped hoping for apologies that would never arrive. Because the longer I sat with myself, the more I realized that closure isn't something they give you. It's what you choose when you stop needing them to understand. Sometimes people don't change. Sometimes they stay exactly who they've always been, only now you're not begging for a seat at their table. You're building your own, smaller maybe, but solid, and real, and yours. That night I wrote something in my journal. Just one sentence. I wasn't difficult. I was just finally present. It sat on the page, quiet, but defiant, because that's how I had learned to exist. Not loudly, not destructively, but fully. There's a myth people tell women like me, the quiet ones, the consistent ones. They say we're only strong when we snap, only powerful when we explode, but strength doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just refuses to leave. Sometimes it stays in the room longer than anyone expected. Sometimes it walks away not to retreat, but to reclaim. Later that week, I passed by a cafe where 2 women were talking at a corner table. One looked frustrated. The other held her hand and said, "You're allowed to leave, even if they're family." I didn't stop, but I smiled. Because we were starting to find each other. All the women who stayed too long, bent too far, loved too hard and too quietly. We were learning. That presence isn't about who sees you. It's about whether you're willing to see yourself clearly, honestly, and without apology. And in that moment, sitting in the last light of day, I knew something I hadn't always believed. I was okay. Not perfect, not finished, but okay. And sometimes that's the most powerful ending there is. They say I was difficult. But no, I wasn't difficult. I just finally showed up. Fully. And when I did, I stopped disappearing. Some days I still think about the hallway outside my father's office, the echo of my own footsteps. The way I used to pause outside the door, gathering breath like armor, hoping this time he might look up and see me. I don't stand in those halls anymore, but the memory of them doesn't haunt me. Not like it used to. Now when I remember, it's almost like watching an old film. Familiar scenes, yes, but the colors are faded, the sound muted. I watch that girl pacing outside the office and I feel for her. I want to tell her she's not invisible. She's just in the wrong room. I think a lot about that version of me, the one who worked through every holiday, the one who stayed late fixing errors she didn't cause just to keep the company name clean, the one who answered emails at midnight hoping someone would notice how steady she was. I don't resent her. She was doing what she thought would earn her love. She just didn't know love should never require you to disappear, and I think that's the deepest shift. Not just that I left, but that I stopped needing them to explain why they couldn't choose me. There's power in letting go without burning everything down, in closing a chapter without scribbling over every word that hurt. I didn't rewrite my history, I just stopped letting it control the ending. There's a quiet kind of joy in that, not the kind people throw parties for, but the kind that lets you sleep through the night and wake up without dread. And when I look in the mirror now, I see someone who didn't just survive betrayal. I see someone who finally chose herself, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but because peace was worth more than loyalty to people who confused control with care. And that changed everything. There's this strange thing that happens when you finally walk away. People assume you'll want something in return, an apology, an explanation, a chance to rewrite the story. But here's the truth. There are things I don't want back. I don't want the seat at that dinner table where I had to shrink to fit in. I don't want the phone calls where every compliment came with a condition. I don't want to be part of a family where love is measured by how useful you are. And I don't want my old self back either. The version of me that said it's fine when it wasn't. The one who thought keeping the peace was more important than being at peace. I used to think healing meant getting everything I lost. Now I know it means no longer needing it, because the most sacred kind of freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with grand exits or slamming doors. It comes quietly in the form of knowing what you'll never allow again. And I don't say that with bitterness. I say it with clarity, the kind you earn when you've spent years untangling truth from tradition. When you've looked at people you were told to trust and realized trust is a gift, not a birthright. There's power in knowing you don't need to be invited back. Because you've already arrived, in your own life, on your own terms, and you don't owe anyone a script where you come crawling home asking for what they couldn't give you in the first place. That's the lie they tell you, that if you just wait long enough, hurt quietly enough, they'll come around. But you know what I've learned? Sometimes they never come around, and still you can bloom. Still you can rise, still you can laugh without permission, and still you can feel whole even if they never say your name again. Because healing was never about them, it was always about you. I used to believe that family was forever, that no matter what happened, what was said, what was done, you were supposed to stay. You were supposed to forgive without conditions, endure without boundaries, love without asking for anything in return. But I've learned something. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, by reciprocity, by the space people are willing to give you, not just the roles they expect you to fill. I'm not angry anymore. I don't walk around replaying old arguments or imagining different endings. I walk forward, lighter, because I stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. People say, "You're so strong for walking away." But that's not what this was about. This wasn't strength. It was clarity. A moment when I finally saw myself not through their disappointment, not through their dismissal, but through my own eyes. Clear, capable, whole. So if you're watching this and you feel like the outsider in your own story, I want you to know something. You are not difficult. You are not dramatic. You are not selfish for choosing peace over performance. You are simply waking up to your own worth. And that is something no one, no matter how close, no matter how loud, gets to take from you. Not anymore. So take the step. Say the thing. Draw the line. Even if your voice shakes, even if they don't understand, even if you walk alone at first, walk anyway. Because freedom doesn't always look like a fresh start. Sometimes it looks like finally sitting still in your own life and realizing you were never the problem. You were just finally present. And if this story spoke to you, share it. Because someone else out there is still standing outside the door wondering if they deserve to knock. They don't need permission. They need to know they're not alone. So drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose yourself quietly but completely, this space is for you. Welcome home.